Can you define for us, Sheila, what guardianship is?
Sure. Well, it's basically where the court system is going to give legal authority and responsibility to someone to make certain decisions on behalf of someone else who's incapable of doing that themselves. So it's usually used when someone cannot safely make important decisions, and that might be based on their age or disability, maybe an illness or some cognitive limitations.
Okay. Okay. Um, so it feels, I have a bunch of questions that I want to ask, but it
Yep.
feels like a big, a big change, a big step, right?
Very much so.
Typically, probably, I would imagine used as a last resort. It's not something that, we're necessarily thinking about, save for very specific and appropriate situations. Am I correct there?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. they are the court is very careful to make sure this is not a super restrictive thing or something that's broad and done across the board. It's taken very seriously.
Okay. So let's now that we've defined sort of what it is, terminology is always important, right? And so, are there key terms that people should be aware of when it
Yeah.
comes to guardianship?
Yeah, I think a lot of people typically hear the word guardian, and that's like the person who's been appointed to decide for someone else. And a guardian is always going to work in someone's best interest. And we want a guardian to be able to respect someone's dignity. So there's a real responsibility in a guardian. And the other word that people might hear is ward, and that's actually the person who needs the support, the person who's getting that assistance from the guardian. And for that person, our goal is to keep as many rights as possible in in any circumstance to make sure that that person maintains dignity.
Okay. So, guardian is the person that's fulfilling the role,
Hmm.
uh, making the decisions. Does it have to be a family member? Like
Doesn't
who
have to be a
who
family
who
member.
can who can be a guardian?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a guardian. It really does come down to the kind of person and the kind of decisions they're willing to make and the responsibility they're willing to take on. It could be a professional, or it could be a family member, or it could be a friend. And so all of these things are taken into account when you go to the court because they're going to be very careful, as we were saying, to make sure that this is done in an appropriate way and that the right person has been chosen to be a guardian.
Okay. So you just said something that sparked a thought. So when we were originally, I think I heard the words court appointed at
Hmm.
some point, and we're going to get into sort of at a high level what the process is. If somebody is thinking that guardianship is right for their situation, they're going to go to the court, right? So I was thinking when I heard court appointed, I was thinking like it's mandated from the court. But this is generally, and you tell me if this is a fair statement, but generally, um, a family, let's just say, is
Hmm.
approaching the court.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
But to
Ju-
make sure that you realize it's a legal thing. It's not something that you could just go off and draw out paperwork and then become a guardian.
Yeah, I gotcha. Makes sense. Which
Yeah.
was kind of relates to, I wanted to get into just key questions. And as you can tell, I have a bunch of questions sort of
Sure.
swirling in my head around it. But one of the first was, how is this different than power of attorney?
Well, power of attorney is voluntary, and you're dealing with someone while the other person still has the capacity to make that decision. So, if I needed to come up with a power of attorney now for what might happen in the future, I'm right now choosing that person. Guardianship is court ordered when a person is no longer able to decide on their own. So if you want to think about it, power of attorney is done sort of ahead of a time. I don't need it today, but I'm going to hire someone now who might want to be, who is given authority to make decisions for me in the case that I'm incapacitated. So that's one way to distinguish it.
I see. And then maybe another way to distinguish it is, just as I'm hearing you talk, and what you just said makes sense, ahead of time, sort of proactive power of
Mhm.
attorney, um, uh, versus, reactive, for lack of a better word,
Mhm.
guardianship. But then there's also sort of like the private public difference. Like power of attorney to me, it's feels it's
Right.
private to me, right? It's a private document. You're making a family decision, as part of a family, a life care planning process or something of like, right?
Right.
Whereas, again, that phrase court ordered guardianship isn't just ordered by the court, but it's also managed by the
Absolutely.
court
Yeah,
over
and
time.
we can talk about the details of that in just a minute, but yes, you're right. Once the power of attorney is created, then you're kind of done. Guardianship is a process that is ongoing that the courts manage over time.
And so another question, these, like I'm not sure if guidelines is the right word, but the guardianship laws maybe is a better word. They differ by state, right?
Yeah, yeah, they do. And for in many different ways. The process itself, what they call it, the forms that they use. In some states, they might call it guardian of the person. Another state might call it guardian of an estate, and they might use different words, conservator or protected person. So it just depends on the state that you're in. But generally speaking, the process is similar, and the goal is similar.
Okay. Okay. So just as I'm firing questions here at Sheila, just a reminder to the audience, if you have questions, please join me. We'd love to get your questions answered, of course. So I'm kind of moving all about here with the questions that are coming to mind, Sheila, but you mentioned preserving as many rights of the ward, the
Yep.
person that is um, needing the help.
Yeah.
What rights do they lose? What can they keep? Which ones can they keep? Can we shed some light on that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I think in a lot of cases the courts are trying to protect rights, right? So they're really trying to give the person as many rights as they possibly can. So when you think about it, we don't want to take away everyone's rights unless in certain circumstances that could happen. But maybe there's a limited guardianship that I know that a lot of courts would look into. So it allows that person to have some autonomy and depending on their circumstance, that could be they'd still be able to marry or maintain relationships as they wish. They might be able to make daily decisions on their own, decide on what clothes to wear or where to live, what kinds of foods to eat, how they might participate in community life. So there may be some restrictions, like your guardian is going to be responsible for your finances or for healthcare decisions, but they're always looking for opportunities to allow the incapacitated person to contribute and have a purposeful, full life as best as they can in a very independent way.
Makes sense. Thank you for humoring me with these questions. I see one from the audience which says, I take care of my 62-year-old mentally challenged sister. Should I try to obtain guardianship for her or power of attorney?
So, I would always lean toward, first of all, I would definitely talk to a legal professional, but I'd have to say that most courts are going to recommend that you start with things like POA, supported decision agreements. So get that healthcare proxy in place because the process itself is pretty extensive and pretty restrictive. There's the petition that has to be made. Then there is there's real specific rules that have to happen. The court would have to gather medical opinions, usually a doctor's, or in this case, it might be a psychologist or psychiatrist. And then there's a hearing scheduled. And then the judge has to determine whether it's really needed and who should serve. And then beyond that, there's an ongoing process where you have to report back to the court in specific reports. What's happening? Are you being responsible in the way that they deemed you to be? And it's really hard to reverse once you get in there. So we always recommend that people start with other methods to manage and help your sister out, but in a way that's not quite as restrictive for you. And, you know her more than anyone. So I would really recommend seeing what works for you rather than jumping to this kind of method right away.
Okay, Sheila. So
That was a mouthful, I know.
no, well, it's an important question, and
Mm.
I guess I would just comment to the question asker. It's a tough one to answer definitively for us in a setting like this. It's something that I guess I'd say two things. One, if you do have access to Carallel, that's a great example of the type of thing to talk through and think through with one of our care advocates, right? Because it's, to the point you made, Sheila, it's such a big decision with lots of different factors that add to, add nuance to it. So that's number one.
Yeah.
Number two, we recognize that connecting with a legal professional usually does come with a price, come with a
Mhm.
cost. That can sometimes be a challenge. One of the resources we're going to drop in the chat is related to legal resources that are lower or no cost that you may not be familiar with. So we'll be dropping that into the chat, and um, anybody in the audience can read that. So a couple other questions. Can guardianship be pursued if a power of attorney is exploiting someone?
If it's exploiting, you can always pursue a guardianship, but like I said, it is, well, first of all, when you go into a court appointment, when there is this hearing, there's going to be, it's really important that the family has to agree on who that guardian's going to be before you address it to the court. I mean, because they don't want to get into a problem with you not knowing who the guardian is. They're already down the path of, okay, you want a guardianship? Now let's go through that process. But if you're not even sure, if the whole family doesn't agree, then you're not ready to approach the court with a hearing situation. That's a tough one.
Yeah. And I'm seeing a bunch of questions come in now, and these are all, I guess I would just make the blanket statement that, well, first off, I'm glad that you're asking them. So thank you. We want to give airtime to these questions because that's what it's all about. That's what this conversation is all about. But the second is across the board, these are this is such a big decision that it really lends
Mhm.
itself to a personal, personal one-on-one conversation with our care advocates if you have access, or legal professional. But this question caught my eye, Sheila, before we keep moving on our run of
Sure.
show here. If you have power of attorney for someone with dementia and they now are angry and adamant they can take care of their own affairs, are you
Mm.
basically forced to seek guardianship? It's not what I want to do.
Well, once again, this is not legal advice, but if they are if they're unable to make a decision right now and they've already signed a power of attorney, then that document's already in place. And they won't be able to change the power of attorney paperwork unless they are capable of doing so. So I guess what I'm saying is that stands as it is, and then it becomes more of a family dynamic issue or a personal relationship, you know, getting through situations like that. So, yeah, this is where it becomes really tough. And we talk an awful lot about dementia and how difficult it is once they made a decision earlier and now they've changed their mind and they're not really capable of making sound decisions because of their mental limitations. So, really tough. And once again, I would really recommend you talk to a legal professional to understand your rights and the person's rights.
Yeah. And I guess the other thing I would add to this particular question is when we were preparing for this session, Sheila, one of the first questions that came to my mind was sort of the difference between guardianship and power of attorney. I guess that makes sense, right? Because um, on the surface you could see some similarities, but any of these scenarios that folks are asking questions about they're just so much more to them, right? So it's not always necessarily either or versus guardianship or power of attorney, I guess, is where I'm coming from, right? There's a lot that sort of goes into it. Again, really lends itself to rolling up our sleeves and getting into the conversation.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I guess I would always just keep the word voluntary in mind. Power of attorney is something you're doing while you can, and you're voluntarily drawing up paperwork to assign responsibilities to someone else. And guardianship is something that's out of that person's control. Um, in a circumstance that really requires it. So that's the point I wanted to make across at the very beginning. The court is very careful about giving someone guardianship, and they require all these steps to make sure that yes, it's the right thing, that it's medically necessary, and that you have the capacity to follow through on all of the responsibilities as dictated by the court.
Yeah, and I want to just they vary. I'm assuming they vary by state, the steps but I
Yep.
want to just touch on a high level on what those steps are to give people
Yeah,
an understanding of generally speaking what to expect. But
sure.
before I do that, like another question, like, so who chooses the guardian, right? And maybe there's not
Mm,
one answer to this, but who
yeah.
chooses the guardian? Is it the family? Maybe in some scenarios it's the court.
Yeah, absolutely. It depends on the situation. Sometimes it's clear cut. There's one person who's doing it and there it makes sense. Other times it's kind of muddy depending on the relationships, or sometimes there's no one available. And so that then those decisions do come down. Someone has to take responsibility. So the court will make a decision, and it is absolutely dependent on circumstances
Okay.
specific to the situation.
Okay. And do guardians get paid? Is this a like, are they compensated for their
Well,
time?
they can be. And there's a there is a provision that allows being paid, but usually family members aren't paid. Expenses can be reimbursed. And if there is a professional who's doing this, they must be paid with court approval. So they're like, once again, they're really keeping a close eye on how this works, and to make sure that people aren't taking advantage.
Right. Right. Okay. Okay, I see another question here. We have time to take this one. So I have a situation that I have considered taking on a mentally disabled 34-year-old woman who's a friend of my 36-year-old daughter who has autism. The woman's family abandoned her after her mother died, and she was placed in a group home. I don't see a question. My heart goes out to the question asker.
I think it's whether she should do it or not.
Yeah, I don't. It's a tough one.
I think that it is really a difficult decision, and it's something to think through and look at all of the what it means to you. And as you already have a daughter with a condition that you might be spending an awful lot of time supporting her, um, it's something to seriously think through, and see if there are other options that you could do to help support that person. Are there other documents that could be drawn up and support that you can offer that, and you could be the power of attorney agent for that person without going through the whole legal guardianship thing. In other words, they could sign the legal documents that say yes, you could take care of this person's finances or their medical decisions without going through the real strict guardianship process. That's what I would probably recommend at least starting.
So yeah, just talking with someone, with a professional, someone with the expertise necessary wherever the question asker lives to understand what options are that are less severe, or
Mhm.
yeah, severe.
Yeah,
it's just because it
it's
is
very
a
rigid. Yes.
rigid, yeah, less rigid maybe is a better way to put it. So hopefully that's helpful. But to the question asker again, and anyone who has questions that they've already put in the Q&A, or have questions that hasn't, we'd love to talk through those things with you in a personal setting so that we can get deeper and really, because to the point you made, Sheila, these are huge decisions that are being made in situations and scenarios that are much more complex than a two-paragraph question in a chat on a webinar.
Yeah.
So we'd love to be there for you in the most appropriate way possible. Sheila, so let's, as we're winding up, generally speaking, what does the process look like? And we've sort of, I think various parts of this have been mentioned at different points in the conversation so far, but if just hypothetical, if somebody
Yeah.
has determined that conservative guardianship is the right thing for their unit, what do they do?
Well, I would first of all really investigate and ask what your role would be, and really look into and ask yourself that question. Am I ready for this? Am I willing to do this? Do I understand the repercussions, and do I understand that I can't it's going to be very difficult to go back once it's done. But generally speaking, once you make that decision, decide to go forward, you will file a petition with the court. And there's certain paperwork, it's different in every state, but it is accessible through a lot of online resources for legal services. So you file a petition. And then once again, the court is going to gather medical opinions from that person's doctor or psychologist. They will schedule a hearing. It could take a couple of months to get a hearing scheduled. And then the judge would decide whether guardianship is needed, and name the person, or decide if there are several people thinking about it within a family, they will decide who that person should be. So, and once again, you really do, it's beneficial to have that decision made before you go in. Who is the guardian that you would like to have selected?
Okay. Yeah. So again, general. That's we say this for general directional sort of understanding of what the process would be. To Sheila's point, a little bit different, from state to state, depending on where you are. Um, if there are other questions that we haven't gotten to, please you can um, reach out to Carallel if you have that contact information. You could reply to your email for this session. Those come to us. We can help you that way. Big and heavy topic, but I'm glad we talked about it and hope the group found it helpful. Closing thoughts.
Closing thoughts. Well, I don't think we really mentioned or outlined the people who might need this, and it might be obvious, but someone with advanced dementia, developmental disabilities, mental illness, or a brain injury could be a recent brain injury. Basically, a person who can't make safe decisions on their own. So, I guess my closing thoughts would be this is a very important protection when people need it, but it's also something to be taken very seriously. There's a lot of responsibility. You should choose it when other options aren't enough because it's difficult to maintain and it's difficult to reverse. And the goal of this whole thing is to support a person's safety and their independence as much as possible.
Thank you for that, Sheila. As it relates to the topic of the day, I don't have anything to add other than these are heavy decisions, and you're doing the best you can to try and weigh making what you feel like is the best decision for your situation. That's the best you can do, and that's what you're doing. That's what I would say to this. You know where to find us at Carallel. We are here when you need us, and we appreciate you being in this session today. Sheila, thank you as always, and we'll
Thank
see
you.
everybody again soon.
Take
Take
good
care.
care.